Okay, welcome. Where I think we in chapter 41, but we're yeah.
Joseph in charge of Egypt.
Yeah, no, we finished Pharaoh's dreams, and then and I think we're at 41. So because Pharaoh has had his dreams, he pulled Joseph out of prison. Joseph told him what his dreams meant, and what they meant was that Egypt would have 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine, and so they need to plan for that. And Pharaoh says, "Well, Joseph, you seem like a smart guy. Why don't you be in charge and you plan for that?" So Joseph is like he does. He rises to the top wherever he is because God's with him and he's a lucky fellow. And now he's second in command of all of Egypt. And that's where we left off. Okay? So Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt." Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in a chariot as his second in command, and men shouted before him, "Make way!" Thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, but without your word, no one will lift hand or foot in all of Egypt." Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zaphanath-Paneah and gave him Asenath, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, to be his wife, and Joseph went throughout the land of Egypt. We're okay? Okay, chapter 41.
Verse 42, 43, somewhere in 44.
Pastor just finished 45.
Chapter 41. Okay. Now remember, we're telling Joseph's story, but I always want to remind you of the bigger story that we're still in, right? Which is, well, one step bigger is we're still telling the story of the sons of Jacob, and we're talking about stories of family and brothers. It's what all of Genesis is about, is family and brothers. But beyond that, there's this bigger plan that God seems to be following after this, forgive my sacrilege, but after creation gets botched, right? He's got this plan to create a creation and then to have human beings be his image, to reflect his nature and glory in that creation. But human beings turn out to be fairly disappointing. And so what's God going to do about that? Well, he's going to create a people who's going to redeem that image and eventually become who God created them to be. So that's the big picture. Within that, you've got the call of Abraham and the story of his family and the brothers, the successive generations of brothers. So and part of the plan, remember from the beginning, is where are they going to end up, right? God says to Abraham, "I'll make you a people and I'm going to give you this land, but not right now," right? For 400 years, your descendants are going to be slaves in a foreign land. So this is all playing out, and much of it is to be expected. We're not surprised that we're in Egypt. Okay? Any questions or comments? Okay. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and Joseph went out from Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout Egypt. During the 7 years of abundance, the land produced plentifully. Joseph collected all the food produced in those 7 years of abundance in Egypt and stored it in the cities. In each city he put the food grown in the fields surrounding it. Joseph stored up huge quantities of grain, like the sand of the sea. It was so much that he stopped keeping records because it was beyond measure. Before the years of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph by Asenath, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh, and said, "It is because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household." The second son he named Ephraim, and said, "It is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering." So Joseph has two sons. The 7 years of abundance in Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said. There was famine in all the other lands, but in the whole land of Egypt there was food. When all Egypt began to feel the famine, the people cried to Pharaoh for food. Then Pharaoh told all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph and do what he tells you." When the famine had spread over the whole country, Joseph opened the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians. For the famine was severe throughout Egypt, and all the countries came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, because the famine was severe in all the world. And the famine, and you can see this coming. The famine is what's going to bring the family back together. So, chapter 42. When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you just keep looking at each other?" He continued, "I have heard that there's grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us, so that we may live and not die." Then 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt, but Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with the others, because he was afraid that harm might come to him. Now remember that Rachel is Jacob's favorite wife. Rachel's dead, and Rachel gave him only 2 sons, and Jacob thinks one of those 2 sons is gone, is dead, thinks Joseph's dead. So the only reminder, the only connection that Jacob has to his wife that's died is Benjamin. So he keeps Benjamin at home. And that's Jacob is sort of overprotective of Benjamin, and that's why. So Israel's sons were among those who went to buy grain, for the famine was in the land of Canaan also. Now Joseph was the governor of the land, the one who sold grain to all its people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. Now, do you remember what is the significance of that? It's what the dream was about. Joseph's brothers bowing down to him. It's the irony is that's the dream that got him here. I mean, that's the dream that he has that makes his brothers mad, that make his brothers try to kill him and then send him and sell him into slavery, which is why he's in Egypt in a position to help them in the first place. As soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. "Where do you come from?" he asked. So Joseph's going to play a little game with his brothers. Well, right, he hasn't changed, but he has changed. I mean, yeah. From the land of Canaan, it says, "Where do you come from?" he asked. "From the land of Canaan," they replied, "to buy food." Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. The narrator's telling us that again. Then he remembered his dreams about them and said to them, "You are spies, you have come to see where our land is unprotected." "No, my lord," they answered, "your servants have come to buy food. We are all the sons of one man. Your servants are honest men, not spies." "No," he said to them, "you have come to see where our land is unprotected." But they replied, "Your servants were 12 brothers, the sons of one man, who lives in the land of Canaan. The youngest is now with our father, and one is no more." Joseph said to them, "It is just as I told you, you are spies, and this is how you will be tested. As surely as Pharaoh lives, you will not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here." So I want to see, and he wants to see his own brother. That's Benjamin is his full brother. "Send one of your number to get your brother. The rest of you will be kept in prison, so that your words may be tested to see if you are telling the truth. If you are not, then as surely as Pharaoh lives, you are spies." And he put them all in custody for 3 days. On the 3rd day, Joseph said to them, "Do this and you will live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers stay here in prison, while the rest of you go to take grain back for your starving households. But you must bring your youngest brother to me, so that your words may be verified and that you may not die." This they proceeded to do. Now, by sending all the brothers but one, he is also testing them to see if they've changed, right? They were willing to sacrifice or give up one of their own brothers earlier. Now he's going to see if they're willing to put themselves at risk or do what they have to do to save one brother. So he's giving, in a sense, he's giving them a chance at redemption. They said to one another, surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. That's why this distress has come upon us. So now they feel the guilt is coming. They feel guilty for what they did to their brother. Reuben replied, didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy, but you wouldn't listen. Now we must give an accounting for his blood. They did not realize that Joseph could understand them, since he was using an interpreter. So they think Joseph's an Egyptian. Joseph's probably speaking Egyptian to them, and they assume that he only speaks Egyptian, but Joseph can understand Hebrew. He turned away from them and began to weep, but then turned back and spoke to them again. So he hears that they're guilty, and this moves Joseph, that his brothers. Yeah, this is you see the theme of reconciliation of brothers in Genesis, what we saw with Jacob and Esau, and how they held each other and hugged each other, and Jacob said, your face is like the face of God. So this is another story of reconciliation playing out. And that Genesis is a profoundly moral text. Genesis is about how brothers treat each other, which is about how humans treat each other. And that theme goes all the way. I mean, just in case you think I'm making this up, remember what the first question in the Bible is of God. Everyone should know this if I'm your pastor. What is the first question that a human being asks God in Genesis? Well, and in the whole Bible. Am I my brother's keeper? Am I my brother's keeper? Are we responsible for our fellow human being? And all of Genesis is playing that question out. All right, he turned away from them, began to weep. So Joseph's having trouble maintaining his deception because he's so moved with emotion. He had Simeon taken from them and bound before their eyes. Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain, to put each man's silver back in his sack, and to give them provisions for their journey. After this was done for them, they loaded their grain on their donkeys and left. At the place where they stopped for the night, one of them opened his sack to get feed for his donkey, and he saw his silver in the mouth of his sack. My silver has been returned, he said to his brothers. Here it is in my sack. Their hearts sank, and they turned to each other trembling and said, what is this that God has done to us? So Joseph's put the money that they were going to buy the grain with, Joseph's had it returned to them, and that's going to make them look like thieves. So when they came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan, they told him all that had happened to them. They said, the man who is Lord over the land spoke harshly to us and treated us as though we were spying on the land. But we said to him, we are honest men, we are not spies. We were 12 brothers, sons of one father. One is no more, and the youngest is now with our father in Canaan. Then the man who is Lord over the land said to us, this is how I will know whether you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers here with me, and take food for your starving households and go, but bring your youngest brother to me, so I will know that you are not spies but honest men. Then I will give your brother back to you, and you can trade in the land. As they were emptying their sacks, there in each man's sack was his pouch of silver. When they and their father saw the money pouches, they were frightened. Their father Jacob said to them, you have deprived me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more. And now you want to take Benjamin. Everything is against me. So Jacob's in a pretty bad mood over all this, because now he thinks he will have lost 3 children. Joseph, Simeon, and then Benjamin when they take Benjamin back, because he thinks they're going to get this person in charge of the land is going to be mad that they've stolen the silver. Okay, verse 37. Then Reuben said to his father, you may put both of my sons to death if I do not bring him back to you. Entrust him to my care, and I will bring him back. So Reuben says to his father, you can kill, and they're his grandsons too, but he says, you can put them to death if I don't bring Benjamin back. But Jacob said, my son will not go down there with you. His brother is dead, and he is the only one left. If harm comes to him on the journey you are taking, You will bring my gray head down to the grave in sorrow. In other words, I'll die. I'll die hopeless. All right, any comments? Anything you notice? Any questions? Okay. Chapter 43. Now the famine was still severe in the land, so when they had eaten all the grain they had brought from Egypt, their father said to them, Go back and buy us a little more food. But Judah said to him, The man warned us solemnly, You will not see my face again unless your brother is with you. If you will send our brother along with us, we will go down and buy food for you. But if you will not send him, we will not go down. Because the man said to us, You will not see my face again unless your brother is with you. So they wait till all the food's gone. They don't do this right away. They draw it out as long as they possibly can. They're not in a hurry to do this. So they don't even think about going back to Egypt until all the food that they've gotten from the first trip is gone. And they need to go by necessity. All right. Israel asked, Why did you bring this trouble on me by telling the man you had another brother? They replied, The man questioned us closely about ourselves and our family. Is your father still living? He asked us. Do you have another brother? We simply answered his questions. How were we to know? He would say, Bring your brother down here. Then Judah said to his father, Send the boy along with me, and we will go at once, so that we and you and our children may live and not die. I myself will guarantee his safety. You can hold me personally responsible for him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him here before you, I will bear the blame before you all my life. As it is, if we had not delayed, we could have gone and returned twice. Then their father Israel said to them, If it must be, then do this. Put some of the best products of the land in your bags and take them down to the man as a gift. A little balm and a little honey, some spices and myrrh, some pistachio nuts and almonds. Take double the amount of silver with you, for you must return the silver that was put back into the mouths of your sacks. Perhaps it was a mistake. Take your brother also and go back to the man at once, and may God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, so that he will let your other brother and Benjamin come back with you. As for me, I am bereaved, I am bereaved. The Bible often repeats things for emphasis to show severity or extreme. The extent of something. So that's why you have a repetition there. Why do they go to Egypt now? They ran out of food. They're in a famine. So what are they? They're refugees. They're in Egypt for the same reason people come here, because we have a lot, and they're from places that don't. The problems that we face, my point is, the problems that we face today are in the Bible, are the same problems that humanity has always faced. Populations displaced, seeking a better life. There's a lot of commonalities between the Bible and modern times. Okay. Any other comments or questions there? All right.
I find it interesting that he's telling them to take all these gifts when they've had a famine, they don't have anything to eat, but yet he's telling them to take honey and nuts and almonds.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
Where did we get that from?
Well, we know this family. I've tried to kind of show as we've read. Abraham and his descendants are not. I don't know how you're used to thinking of them, but they are rich. I mean, they're in the top 10% of their class. They're not lowly inhabitants. Abraham already is a wealthy and very powerful man. And we saw it again with Jacob. Jacob has hundreds of people following him. He had livestock. He was a cattle baron, right? So this is not a poor family. This is a rich family. This is a rich and powerful family, and presumably they still have some wealth money and power amassed and built up, right? Um, so that does that help answer the question?
But the nuts and the almonds they could eat,
Yeah.
and yet they were saying, no,
But
we
what
have
about
no food.
this?
We
What
have
about
no
the
food.
animals?
Yeah, well,
They
I mean, those are luxury. Those back then, I mean, and today, those are luxury items. Nuts are still expensive, right?
Yeah.
Nuts aren't not pistachios are not what you eat if you're on a budget.
They
Had to feed their animals too, the grain. They couldn't feed them this stuff that was
That's
plentiful in
true,
Canaan.
yeah.
Yeah,
That's true.
and I'm not an expert on agriculture, so I don't know why they might have nuts but not have grain. I don't.
Well,
Someone who knows about agriculture might be able to
for
talk
one
about that.
thing, nuts can have a pretty long shelf life,
That's true.
whereas grain doesn't.
Mhm.
And for another thing, the trees, the nut trees, the almonds and pistachio trees, might have bear fruit longer because they have the roots that go down further into the ground to get to the water. So they probably didn't bear fruit the whole family.
Yeah.
But they might have for a couple of years.
Trees, I guess, can be more drought resistant than a field of wheat.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
Wheat's gonna have a real shallow root.
Okay, well then there you go. You guys answered partly answered the question. So, yeah, I mean they don't have nothing, and again they're not poor. This is a wealthy family.
Well, they had plenty of silver to pay for
Yeah.
the food. So.
Yep.
Yeah, you figure they're wealthy.
That's a good. But these are good questions.
You probably didn't have a way to store grain from farms and things. It hadn't been until more recent time that you could store grain for
Yeah.
several years.
Well, and that's what Joseph's doing in Egypt, right? He was creating storage for crops that I guess weren't ordinarily stored back then. They
Yeah,
just
that Rodney made a good point because grain will get weevil in it, and that they eat the center
yeah.
of the grain. And
All you got left's a hose.
yeah, Joseph must have a way figured out.
I watched a documentary once that said that this was where beer came from. That beer was a way to store and preserve grain.
Well, that's true. That's true because it's fermented. It'll keep longer than.
If it's
than
fermented,
grain
it's
will.
not going to spoil.
Yeah, and also beer would sanitize the water because you're going to boil it. So if this is why they used beer and wine a lot in like France and countries in Europe because their water was polluted from them not trying
Yeah.
to keep it clean, and so they'd make beer and wine out of it because you would sanitize the water
Sure.
when you processed it.
Okay, so they've got a plan, and they're going to
Right.
head back to Egypt the second time. Verse 15, right? So the men, excuse me, my voice is still, I still have congestion in my chest and throat here. That's the only thing that isn't back to 100%. So the men took the gifts and double the amount of silver, and Benjamin also. They hurried down to Egypt and presented themselves to Joseph. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of his house, "Take these men to my house, slaughter an animal, and prepare dinner. They are to eat with me at noon." The man did as Joseph told him and took the men to Joseph's house. Now the men were frightened when they were taken to his house. They thought, "We were brought here because of the silver that was put back into our sacks the first time. He wants to attack us and overpower us and seize us as slaves and take our donkeys." So they went up to Joseph's steward and spoke to him at the entrance to the house. "Please, sir," they said, "we came down here the first time to buy food, but at the place where we stopped for the night, we opened our sacks, and each of us found his silver, the exact weight, in the mouth of his sack, so we have brought it back with us. We have also brought additional silver with us to buy food. We don't know who put our silver in our sacks." "It's all right," he said. "Don't be afraid. Your God, the God of your father, has given you treasure in your sacks. I received your silver." Then he brought Simeon out to them. The steward took the men into Joseph's house, gave them water to wash their feet, and provided fodder for their donkeys. They prepared their gifts for Joseph's arrival at noon because they had heard that they were to eat there. Then, when Joseph came home, they presented to him the gifts they had brought into the house, and they bowed down before him to the ground. He asked them how they were, and then he said, "How is your aged father you told me about? Is he still living?" They replied, "Your servant, our father, is still alive and well," and they bowed low to pay him honor. As he looked about and saw his brother Benjamin, his own mother's son, he asked, "Is this your youngest brother, the one you told me about?" And he said, "God be gracious to you, my son." Deeply moved at the sight of his brother, Joseph hurried out and looked for a place to weep. He went into his private room and wept there. After he had washed his face, he came out and, controlling himself, said, "Serve the food." They served him by himself, the brothers by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because the Egyptians could not eat with Hebrews, for that is detestable to the Egyptians. The men had been seated before him in the order of their ages, from the firstborn to the youngest, and they looked at each other in astonishment when portions were served to them from Joseph's table. Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as anyone else's, so they feasted and drank freely with him. That's something to know about ancient cultures, and it's significant, very significant for the whole Bible, that eating who you ate with was more meaningful for them than it is for us. I mean, I always use the analogy of high school, because who you ate with at high school was very important, right? The table you sat at. I don't know what else. That's the best analogy I can come up with for what the ancient world was like. If if you were seen sitting at a table with people who were not in your group or lower than your group, the stigma, the fear, the gossip, the snickering, and all of and so that's what you're reading about here with the Egyptians not being willing to sit at table with the Israelites, and it also tells you what it meant when Jesus sat at table with sinners and prostitutes and tax collectors, right? It wasn't insignificant. It's more than we typically understand in our culture to sit at table with somebody. And when I say, this table is the table of God, it's Christ's table and he welcomes you to it, there's a lot of historical, cultural significance to that. The lesson is the way in which God's grace actually disrespects human in and out groups, right? Who we think's acceptable, and we make dividing lines between races and genders and sexualities and whatever you want of people who are acceptable, and God's grace cuts across those dividing lines about who is welcome and who is included. Any other comments or questions here? Okay.
The amount of food that he gave to Benjamin, was that another test to see how the brothers might treat Benjamin by giving Benjamin so much more than the others?
Maybe. We're not told what Joseph's motive is.
But he wanted to know how Benjamin had been treated.
Yeah. That he was, and he may be wanting to be. Yeah. Okay. So there's a couple things. He could be providing a test. He could also simply be. Families do this. The other brothers are all from another mother, and so it's reasonable for Joseph to suppose maybe Benjamin's been excluded, maybe Benjamin's been mistreated, and he might want to be compensating for that.
That could have made the other brothers angry, though, that he got so much more and was treated specially.
It could, yeah. Yeah. Okay, chapter 44. Now Joseph gave these instructions to the steward of his house: fill the men's sacks with as much food as they can carry, and put each man's silver in the mouth of his sack. Then put my cup, the silver one, in the mouth of the youngest one's sack. along with the silver for his grain. And he did as Joseph said. As morning dawned, the men were sent on their way with their donkeys. They had not gone far from the city when Joseph said to his steward, "Go after those men at once, and when you catch up with them, say to them, 'Why have you repaid good with evil? Isn't this the cup my master drinks from and also uses for divination? This is a wicked thing you have done.' When he caught up with them, he repeated these words to them. But they said to him, 'Why does my lord say such things? Far be it from your servants to do anything like that. We even brought back to you from the land of Canaan the silver we found inside the mouths of our sacks. So why would we steal silver or gold from your master's house? If any of your servants is found to have it, he will die, and the rest of us will become my lord's slaves.' 'Very well then,' he said, 'let it be as you say. Whoever is found to have it will become my slave. The rest of you will be free from blame.' Each of them quickly lowered his sack to the ground and opened it. Then the steward proceeded to search, beginning with the oldest and ending with the youngest. And the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. At this they tore their clothes. Then they all loaded their donkeys and returned to the city. Joseph was still in the house when Judah and his brothers came in, and they threw themselves to the ground before him. Joseph said to them, 'What is this you have done? Don't you know that a man like me can find things out by divination? What can we say to you? What can we say to my lord?' Judah replied. So do you know what divination is? Sorry, that's.
What did you say?
Do you know what divination is? I mean, it's the second time that word's been mentioned.
Yeah.
Divination is a common practice in ancient societies and some cultures today, where you, well, I guess in ours too, but it's divination is a type of magic, where the goal is to find out the will, usually to find out the will of the gods, or to find out something about the future, or to get some knowledge that the god, to get, I can put it this way, to get some knowledge that the gods have that you want.
Is
And so it's like reading tea leaves, or
like a psychic?
yes, like a, so, or getting your palm read, or going to the psychic and having them, read your cards or whatever. That's what divination is, and it was very common in the ancient world to practice divination. Uh, and there's other instances of it, and that's what was going on though too. I mean, it's a form of divination throughout the Old Testament when the kings would ask the prophets, how should I go to war against the Philistines? You see this a lot in Kings, First and Second Kings, Chronicles, and Samuel, where the kings will ask their prophets what they should do. That's the same thing. It's the same concept as divination. Divination's forbidden in the law, but we don't. Of course, this is before the law is given. So Joseph is just being normal when he says something like this. But that's what divination is. It's trying to seek knowledge from the gods using some kind of mechanism. And like I said, tea leaves, reading the entrails of sacrificed animals. The book of the I Ching that the Chinese, they do, they throw the sticks. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah.
There's all sorts of processes for divination, but does it there's some mechanism, whether it's cards or palm reading or tea leaves or whatever, and then the person who is doing the divination knows how to interpret whatever mechanism they've pursued.
Joseph interpreted dreams, so is that part of the divination?
Joseph interpreted dreams, so is that, it's sort of a form of divination, yeah. Joseph has the ability to interpret signs, and dreams could be one of those signs. All right, where are we now? 16. What can we say? Yeah, chapter 44, verse 16. What can we say to my Lord? Judah replied. What can we say? How can we prove our innocence? God has uncovered your servant's guilt. We are now my Lord's slaves, we ourselves and the one who was found to have the cup. But Joseph said, far be it from me to do such a thing. Only the man who was found to have the cup will become my slave. The rest of you go back to your father in peace. This is clearly a test. Right? Will they be their brother's keeper? Right? will they save the one brother?
Uh,
That's,
yeah.
again, and it goes back to that question, am I my brother's keeper? And this is the test. And in a way, that's God's test. That's the whole Bible. Are we our brother's keeper? Do we take responsibility for the people around us who are weak and who are vulnerable? And Jesus, Matthew 25, says, what you've done to the least of these, you've done to me. The way you've treated the weak and the poor and the needy, the prisoner, the naked, the people who he's talked about, that's how you treated me. And it's similar. I mean, you're getting it here because Joseph sees himself in his younger brother, right? He was that younger brother who was abandoned and left behind by his brothers. So Joseph says, "Okay, I'm gonna see how you're gonna respond now." Then Judah went up to him and said, "Please, my lord, let your servant speak a word to my lord. Do not be angry with your servant, though you are equal to Pharaoh himself." My lord asked his servants, "Do you have a father or a brother?" And we answered, "We have an aged father, and there is a young son born to him in his old age. His brother is dead, and he is the only one of his mother's sons left, and his father loves him." Then you said to your servants, "Bring him down to me so I can see him for myself." And we said to my lord, "The boy cannot leave his father. If he leaves him, his father will die." But you told your servants, "Unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you will not see my face again." When we went back to your servant my father, we told him what my lord had said. Then our father said, "Go back and buy a little more food." But we said, "We cannot go down. Only if our youngest brother is with us will we go. We cannot see the man's face unless our youngest brother is with us." Your servant my father said to us, "You know that my wife bore me 2 sons. One of them went away from me, and I said, 'He has surely been torn to pieces.' That's Joseph. And I have not seen him since. If you take this one from me too, and harm comes to him, you will bring my gray head down to the grave in misery. So now, if the boy is not with us when I go back to your servant my father, and if my father, whose life is closely bound up with the boy's life, sees that the boy isn't there, he will die. Your servants will bring the gray head of our father down to the grave in sorrow." Your servant guaranteed the boy's safety to my father. I said, "If I do not bring him back to you, I will bear the blame before you, my father, all my life. Now then, please let your servant remain here as my lord's slave in place of the boy, and let the boy return with his brothers. How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? No, do not let me see the misery that would come upon my father." All right, so
Joseph is sure dragging this out.
he really is. He is dragging this out. That is accurate. Um, and 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 this is Judah here speaking, kind of arguing his case. And so you've seen the character of Judah and how Judah has grown morally as a man and as a brother over the years. And that's why I say that Genesis is all about morals. Genesis is a, you can think of Genesis as an instruction manual for morals. And it's the way Jews have always used it. These stories are been studied and passed on and taught from generation to generation, not just as a cultural heritage, although that's part of it, to teach children, who you are and where you came from. But these stories also teach morals. They teach ethics. They teach compassion. And that's the real purpose of these texts, is to study them, to enter into them, to put yourself in the places of the different brothers, to sort of test yourself to see how you would act. In other words, and the whole Bible is this. It's a tool. You read these stories not just to amuse yourself, but to test yourself. Just as this whole scene is a test for the brothers, reading these texts is supposed to be a test for us. Are we our brother's keeper? Would we sacrifice ourselves for our brother? Would we take care of the weakest and the neediest? How would we act? How do we act when we're in these positions? And we're meant to make the connections, too, with our world. How do we treat people when they come to us when we have a lot and they don't have a little? They have little. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Now Joseph's the big reveal is coming. Wouldn't this make a good movie? I don't know why they haven't. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, "Have everyone leave my presence." There was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers, and he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Um, yeah, the older brothers are traumatized and scared, and this will go on for the rest of Genesis. Um, there's always tension between Joseph and his brothers. All right, verse 4. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." When they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will not be plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler of all Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, 'This is what your son Joseph says. God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me. You, your children and grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and all you have. I will provide for you there, because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise you and your household and all who belong to you will become destitute.'" All right. Joseph's comfort to his brothers is that this was all God's plan. And I've said this before, but Genesis is also Genesis is a story that constantly puts before us the paradox or the tension between God's plan and free will. Because God has a plan, and there is a sense in which, yeah, I mean, it's God has a plan, and His plan is going to happen, right? So God already told Abraham, all your kids, your descendants are going to be slaves in Egypt. That's how it's going to go down. Um, but also the promise, right? You're going to have children, and then Abraham makes other decisions. He sleeps with Hagar and gives birth to Ishmael. So there's all these choices that threaten to derail God's plan and cause detours and tensions and problems. But at the same time, the master narrative, the story is going to end how God wants the story to end. So there's this interplay between God's plan and human free will, and the two are woven together, and it raises sort of interesting questions about human responsibility. Um, so look at just to be a simple one is look what Joseph says. Don't worry about it. This was God's will. But are his brothers culpable?
Yes. Well, I mean, they had a choice, and this teaches us to also remember what God's told us to do and not do.
Mm-hmm.
And they should have protected their brother, shouldn't have put him in that, Joseph in that spot.
Yeah.
So they're guilty of that. The plan, of course, comes out because God's sovereign.
What about, say, culpability? You know, are Jacob and Rebekah culpable for lying to Isaac and deceiving Esau and stealing the blessing? That was God's plan. I mean, that's why I say, and we only have about 5 minutes left, but that's why I say this book it's a textbook for teaching morals and ethics. And there are all sorts of. I have a great book called The Genesis of Ethics, written by a rabbi, um, Vysotsky, I think is the rabbi's name. But he just, what he does in that book is he takes all these stories in Genesis and draws out these moral case studies that are meant to be kind of debated and thought about, pulled back and forth. And that makes us moral people, right? Where these stories teach us to kind of question and examine our own choices and our own lives. Are we doing the right thing? Oh. Okay. We have 5 minutes, so let's see if we can get to the end of chapter 45. Verse 12, I think. Is that right? You can see for yourselves, and so can my brother Benjamin, that it is really I who am speaking to you. Tell my father about all the honor accorded me in Egypt, and about everything you have seen, and bring my father down here quickly. Then he threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept, and Benjamin embraced him, weeping. And he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. Afterward his brothers talked with him. When the news reached Pharaoh's palace that Joseph's brothers had come, Pharaoh and all his officials were pleased. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Tell your brothers, do this, load your animals and return to the land of Canaan, and bring your father and your families back to me. I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you can enjoy the fat of the land." You are also directed to tell them, "Do this, take some carts from Egypt for your children and your wives, and get your father and come. Never mind about your belongings, because the best of all Egypt will be yours." So the sons of Israel did this. Joseph gave them carts, as Pharaoh had commanded, and he also gave them provisions for their journey. To each of them he gave new clothing, but to Benjamin he gave 300 shekels of silver and 5 sets of clothes. And this is what he sent to his father: 10 donkeys loaded with the best things of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys loaded with grain and bread and other provisions for his journey. Then he sent his brothers away, and as they were leaving, he said to them, "Don't quarrel on the way." So they went up out of Egypt and came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan. They told him, "Joseph is still alive. In fact, he is ruler of all Egypt." Jacob was stunned. He did not believe them. But when they told him everything Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the carts Joseph had sent to carry him back, the spirit of their father Jacob revived, and Israel said, "I am convinced my son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." All right. So that's the end of 45. Any comments? Anything you notice? Anything you have questions about?
I'm pondering whether or not people are guilty now. I think it's, yeah, because God knows what's going to happen, so.
Well, I mean,
it's not their, it's the way God happened to get to the end of his plan.
yeah. Well, and it's, I mean, Joseph's talking about God's plan here in a certain context, right? And the context is forgiveness. So how do we come to forgive our brothers who have hurt us? I mean, and you could ask, is it fair? Is it just? Is it right that Joseph's brothers not be punished?
It puts man in the place of God, and if they're making
It's up
that
to God.
decision.
Yeah, but we don't leave all justice up to God. I mean, we punish people.
We have moral laws that certainly protect people from the abuse.
When we impose consequences when people break those laws.
That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah. And is to not impose them, is that wrong? I mean, and we ask question again. That's one of the big controversies today, and it ties into this story in two ways: the idea of forgiveness, but also the idea of immigration. Do we forgive people who entered the country illegally to seek a better life, or do they need to be punished? Do they need to suffer the consequences of their crime?
Are we our brother's keeper?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, and I mean that's a lot of politics boils down to that question. Do we take care of the people who need taken care of? So this is a moral book, and its role in our lives is to both teach us morals, but also to test us.
There seems to be quite a bit of parallel between the morals taught here and what Christ taught.
Sure, there are. Yeah, same God.
I think it's interesting too that he says, "Don't quarrel on the way back."
Don't quarrel. Yeah. Well, yeah, and that's I mean, if you, I after going to seminary, so you go to seminary, and most seminaries do this. You study the Bible, you study theology. The way they usually break it up is you usually take at least 2 courses on the New Testament, and they generally divide it up between the 4 Gospels and the Book of Acts, and that's 1 course. And then your second course is New Testament 2, where you study the letters. And that's how most seminaries kind of break up the New Testament. You study the Gospels and Acts, and then you study the letters. So after it was, you don't always take them in the right. I took New Testament 2, which was all the letters, before New Testament 1, where I read the Gospels. But I remember after studying in seminary New Testament 2, where we read all the letters, and I thought half of the New Testament, that's the letters, are basically letters saying that don't quarrel, get along. That's what Paul's saying. If you were to just boil down all the letters in the New Testament, that's basically what they boil down to. Is you people need to knock off your petty arguing and rivalries and factions and arguing. You need to get along.
I think about it, because one of his letters was written for that reason. That's the way he starts out most of his letters is,
Sure.
It has come to my attention that so-and-so's not doing this, and they're causing problems, and there's one, I don't remember what it was, but somebody was trying to take over the whole church and
Yep.
not let people come in of their own free will, only select ones to be in that church, and something of that line. I can't remember which one it was.
Yeah. But groups of people getting along is what half the Bible's about. And yeah, so when Joseph says don't quarrel on the way,
He knew his brothers what they did.
he knew what people were like, and Paul is saying the same thing in all of his letters. There's a lot of continuity, a lot of common themes, and that's why I say politics is just public morality. I mean the
Immorality.
or immorality, right? I mean it's how do we do this? How as a group, as a community, as a church, as a family, any group of people, you can pick whichever one you want to focus on. But that question, how do groups get along? How do groups manage rivalries, competing desires, conflicts, jealousies, all that human stuff? That's why there's no life without politics. I mean, though there's 2 ways to have life without politics. Actually, 2. This is a key. One is to have a dictatorship. There's no politics in North Korea. But the second way, and this is kind of the way we try in America, is to be individualistic, or to live in such a way that you don't need other people and don't have bonds between other people. And we're one of the most successful societies in history at doing this. I mean, and that's part of the problem. That's one reason why churches are dying. Because our culture has kind of made it a goal for every person to be as independent as possible. So we don't live, we don't live with our extended families anymore, right? Even it used to be that you'd live near and with your family through 99% of human history. So we have created this society where, because of all that we have, we can be totally individual and independent. And in that way, we've tried to extricate ourselves from politics. I don't have to argue with, and people leave church for that, right? Church has politics. I don't need that in my life. My life would just be easier and I don't need it, right? I don't need the church. I can live without it materially. So we've created a society where materially and economically we can be isolated individuals. And we sort of strive for that. And you can see why, right? You can understand why. It's because in some ways it's easier to live that way, right? When someone tells me I'm spiritual but not religious, what I often hear is someone telling me, well, I want to have a connection with God, but I don't want to deal with all the problems and annoyances of other people. And that's why in my sermon a few weeks ago I said one of the most important things about church is obnoxious people. That's how God improves us morally, is you need to be bound up with people that annoy you and upset you and think differently from you and want different things from you. Because if you choose the dark side, if you take the easy path that America gives you to just be an individual, I don't need anybody else, I can just, if a group bothers me, if someone bothers me, I can just walk away. You can do that, and in some ways that'll make your life easier, but you will not become who God wants you to be. So anyway, that's a long rant, but yeah, don't quarrel on the way. God bless. That'll be my prayer. Let me say, God, we have a hard time being our brother's keeper. We have a hard time not quarreling. We have a hard time living in community. And we are tempted, and it is easier in some ways to just be alone, to be independent. But you call us into community, in part to shape our souls, to make us morally better. And so, Lord, help us be our brother's keeper and help us not to quarrel on our way. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks, everybody.